saying no in marketing is more important than saying yes, because you could spend all day, every day, forever trying to grow a business. There's an unlimited number of things to try. For us, like this past year, webinars were the best channel by far. A lot of people outside of marketing would say 20 grand for a webinar. That's so expensive. And I'll tell you, like, by far our best performer.
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Desmond, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Brian Austgen. Brian is the Director of Demand Generation at Maxio, a B2B billing and financial reporting platform, and he has over a decade of experience in digital marketing. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nate. Glad to be here.
First question for you. What marketing channels do you think are currently undervalued by B2B industry?
Undervalued channels. Well, to reverse the question, like what channels are overvalued, right? I would say like paid search seems to be pretty overvalued still. And like digital ads in general seem to be quite overvalued. They're so simple. I think it's easy to lean into. And so then when you think of what's the trade-off, how do you take money from those channels and what other channels would you put that budget into? Investing in your brand, whether it be events, events could be too expensive, but there are plenty of events out there that I think are at fantastic value. Get people in person really helps build the brand. There are a lot of newsletters, depending on your industry, that you want to be involved in. And really, I think like where is your like ideal customer being influenced? And are you spending like a proportionate amount of budget in those channels, right? So my guess is if you looked at your budget, mapped out which channels you're investing in and what percentage, and then if you had an attribution tool or even you just took an estimate based on industry standards, what channels are influencing your market, you'll probably see a pretty big disconnect and can figure out some channels that would be, really good values. So for us, like this past year, webinars were the best channel by far. A lot of people outside of marketing would say 20 grand for a webinar. That's so expensive. And I'll tell you, like by far our best performer. So there's so many ways to approach that though, of course. You can pay like an influencer or work with a partner or put it on yourself. And, that really depends on your business. So hopefully that, gives some ideas what you'd want to do for finding more efficient channels.
That's awesome. I love the way you flipped it on its head and looked at it from the other perspective. When you say you want to be where your ideal customers are being influenced, how do you determine where that is?
Yeah. I mean, you can look at, depending on the stage of your company, how many customers you have, right? You can look at your current customers and where they're being influenced and what's sourcing them using a combination of attribution modeling, sources, like what were the lead sources that created those deals, and self-reported attribution. You can also talk to them. That's probably the best way. Talk to as many customers as you can, as frequently as you can, listen to calls. If you have a tool like Gong or something listening to calls, then what you want to do is make sure Gong is telling you when people say how they heard about you. Like just tell Gong, listen for this thing. Tell us how you heard about us. So those are like a few ways. And then of course, like talk to your peers. Are there other, people in the industry, not necessarily competitive to you, but in the industry trying to target a similar person and what's working for them? That's how you find great co-marketing opportunities and how you like make sure you're not like missing something, because you don't know what you don't know. So if you're not talking to your peers, talking to your prospects, you're going to miss it.
How do you manage all of this in the work you do? Because all of this can feel a bit overwhelming. There are a million different things that you could be doing. How do you balance focus with experimentation?
I always say a good marketer says yes to the right things. A great marketer says no to the right things. Or I guess another way to phrase it is saying no is in marketing is more important than saying yes, because you could spend all day, every day, forever trying to grow a business. There's an unlimited number of things to try. So if I'm trying to balance it, you have to look at what your goals are as a company, like more than just marketing. What are the company's goals? And how do you reflect those goals in your budget? Your budget becomes your strategy. So if you want to grow in a specific segment or grow in a specific region, you better have budget allocated and a plan for, targets, how you're going to grow in that region. And then when you go down to spending that money, right? Again, your budget becomes your strategy. You're asking the questions, what do we think is most effective? If you're established in a category or a space, you can use what's worked best in the past. You have a lot of quantitative data for what's going to work. If you're not established in the space, eventually you're going to have to get some qualitative data and just make a gut decision, right? And say, I think that we're going to go with this newsletter sponsorship over that newsletter sponsorship because the CPMs are about the same, but we think this one's going to be 20% better. And it's just gut. And that's something you have to get comfortable with. And that's why experience, I think, matters a lot in marketing, because if you've never done it before, you're not going to have like the right gut, right? So always respect the gut of people who've done that thing 1,000 times. So if you've got someone on your team who's done it more than you, what do they think? And, don't discount that.
How do you improve your gut faster?
That's a really great question, Nate. How you improve your gut? I think probiotics are like the number one. Actually, testing with discipline is my approach to improving your gut faster. I think it's really easy in marketing to just say, oh, I want to try this, and get excited about the idea of trying something and not actually being disciplined about how you're trying it, what the ramifications are. To really improve your gut, you have to have learnings, right? So there's a phrase, failure is feedback, feedback is knowledge, knowledge is power, right? If your failure is not creating feedback, you're not getting knowledge and you're not getting power, right? So how do you make your failure give you the most feedback is what I would say is how you improve your gut. The way to do that is with solid testing methodologies that's scientific and defined at the beginning, that you're not grading your own homework. You're saying, this is what we're going to do. This is the hypothesis for the result. This is what we're expecting. Based on what the result is, we will do these things. So you don't get to the end of, hey, we decided to send an email on Friday, and I think it went pretty well, so we'll send more emails on Friday. That's what a lot of people think testing is, and I can guarantee you that is not a good way to improve your gut, nor your gut health.
I'd love to get even more tactical. Like, let's say you decide between these two different newsletters, you decide to go with A instead of B. What would your testing plan look like?
Well, if you're going with A instead of B for a newsletter, I'm not sure you're doing a test, right? Do you have a control? Every test should have a control and a variable, right? Or at the very least, two variables, right? Like you're comparing something to. If you have no place to compare, you're not really starting. So if I hadn't been doing any newsletter sponsorships and I was going to sponsor a specific newsletter, I would look at where my least effective dollars were being spent. And I would say it has to at least beat those least effective dollars, because if it's even less effective than that, like it's a failure, right? And that's fine. We just talked about how failure is feedback, but you have to know, hey, this this wasn't better than my least effective dollars. So however you're measuring that, cost per SAL, cost per SAO, cost per, new dollar of, ARR acquired, whatever your business uses to measure that, you better be able to measure that from the newsletter you're doing. Once that data comes in, you already have defined, hey, if it's better than this price, we're going to keep doing it and not do this other thing. If it's worse than this level of performance, we're going to not continue doing webinars, right? But because then you're using the feedback of that.
I'd actually love to go back to webinars, which sound very exciting in that they are delivering a lot of results. How did you first discover webinars as a great marketing lever?
I mean, I wouldn't say we discovered them as a great marketing lever, right? That's be like, hey, I heard of this thing called Google search. Have you tried it? Right? Like, I think it's a pretty known thing that it's a good marketing lever. How we discovered it worked for us was we ran a good one and it did really well. And it did so well, we couldn't ignore it. And like, sometimes that is what happens. Even if you don't have all the proper testing stuff set up, you just run something, it goes super well. All of a sudden you're like, sales has plenty of leads this month. That's so weird. You look at what's happening, you're like, oh, it's like this webinar is driving a crazy amount of engagement, right? And that's awesome when you can try something like that, even without discipline, and find that it works. But it's not my recommended approach. So in our case, we did a webinar. We weren't expecting it to be as successful as it was. It was about 4 times more successful than we would have expected it to be. And so we're like, okay, like there's something here. Then we tried a series of other webinars with different people, different partners, different messages, and some of them performed really well and some of them performed really poorly. So qualitatively, when you say, okay, this webinar, you knew it performed well quantitatively. Qualitatively, what's unique about this webinar? Well, it had this message. It was at this time to this audience who was thinking about this thing because it's that time of year. And then you look at it and you're like, so now we know we can only run so many webinars in a period, because you can't promote a webinar to the same person like once a week. Like, that's way too frequently, right? So if we have them too close together, they're not going to perform as well. If we don't have a solid message to the webinar that's like timely, it's not going to perform as well. If we don't have an interesting partner or influencer or shtick to the webinar, it's not going to perform as well. So that's our like formula, if you were to like making a good webinar.
And you mentioned $20,000 per webinar. Where does that money go?
Yeah, I mean, I was just throwing out a number there because the price differs a lot, right? But depending on the webinar, right, you can pay for an expert or multiple experts, or you can just pay for some promotion of it. Perhaps you're paying for the promotion prior to the webinar to try to drive registrations, or you're kind of, making the most of everything you do. I think like that's a key concept every marketer should be thinking about in 2025. How do you make the most of every individual activation? And you're actually thinking, how do I apply this money to get people to view the webinar after it happened, right? Because there's all these, great tools now. You can make 30 video clips from a webinar in 2 minutes, and then you can share those. You can get, if you have partners or like thought leaders, subject matter experts on it, you can have them repost like clips or just like summarize key insights from the webinar on their own LinkedIn page, which you can then promote as a thought leader ad. And that's another area that like I mean, it's just exploding with how successful they are as thought leader ads on LinkedIn, because people are engaging with the people they follow, not the brands they follow on the platform. Like another area you should look into in 2025 if you haven't yet and you want to be more efficient.
And now a word for our sponsor. It's me. I'm actually not taking any sponsors in season 1, but I just wanted to say thank you for listening. It's been such a joy recording these episodes, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I have. If you would like to support the podcast, the single most impactful thing you can do is leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. This will help new people discover the podcast. And if you have someone in your life who's passionate about marketing, send this their way. They'll probably love diving into these insider tactics and stories. With that, back to the conversation. What is the anatomy of a thought leader ad on LinkedIn? Like, where do people click? How do you attribute?
Yeah, attribution, that's a tough question with thought leadership ads because it's really more of an awareness play, right? So I would say it's more of a measurement conversation than an attribution conversation. So the anatomy is someone else posts something that promotes you in some way, right? So we would have someone on our webinar say, hey, I had a great time on this webinar. This is what we covered. You should check it out here, and like answer some questions or something, right? We take that LinkedIn post, assuming the person approves the post for Maxio to promote it. We'll put some money behind it. We'll serve it to our exact ICP target account list, basically uploaded from Salesforce or whatever CRM you're using. And so we'll make sure that the exact right people we want to see this ad are seeing the ad, not from us, but from the subject matter expert we brought in to talk about us and to talk about this topic. So that's the anatomy of it. You, of course, could have them like send specific links, and you could have, a bit.ly with a, URL parameters, and you could try to do the attribution game. But I think in general, it's really more, you're getting in front of the right person, and how like every company should be measuring the effect of their marketing mix. How is this improving, branded search? How is this improving like brand awareness, aided and unaided? And if you're measuring that periodically, you're saying over this period of time, the mix of everything we did, not a single thought leadership ad, but the mix of everything you did is improving those like key brand metrics.
Going back to events and taking a slight pivot from webinars, you mentioned that events like offline events are often too expensive. How do you think about offline events from a marketing perspective?
We like to attribute a percentage of them to like long-term branded growth. So like if I was to look by channel, let's say, at how much it cost us to generate a sales accepted leads, right? Events are going to appear very expensive. You got to send people there. You've got to, make a booth, which is always an ordeal, unless you're like going to a ton of events, at least. If you're going to a ton of events, you probably have like your booth like in a box, basically, right? But that is a big consideration. The sponsorship fees are just going through the roof for a lot of these things. So you're going to have a high cost per SAL. So what you have to say is that actually the only value that I'm getting from the event? Because that's like a very performance marketing mindset, right? Like it costs more to get an SAL from an event than it costs to get an SAL from a Google search ad, right? And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. And the but is the key, like I'm also getting in front of this many hundred more people, and they're going to see my brand in these ways, right? And being at the event's going to enable these other things, right? So if you like think about that and like impressions and the quality of the impressions you're getting, right? Every person you see at an event is better than them attending a webinar, right? And so you can start comparing like different metrics and you can say, well, actually 60, maybe 70% of my expense to go to an event really should be credited towards like a different goal than just lead generation.
Which that is a fascinating area in and of itself, especially for those of us who are more performance focused. It can be difficult to stomach things that are brand in activity, and yet they actually do have a value that doesn't show up in the cost per lead. How do you think about branding as a SaaS company?
I'm really not a brand expert, but I have learned a few valuable lessons that I'll share. One is try not to rebrand unless you have to, because it is so expensive and time consuming. And it like you will spend millions of dollars for years and people will still try to find you as your old brand. I promise you this. So we are still seeing this occur. And it creates an interesting growth challenge because as your new brand is exploding in growth and it looks awesome, 200% year over year, like growth for big awareness and people searching for it, right? Your old brands are just dropping off a cliff for how like much they're being searched for, right? So it creates this weird thing where you have to say, well, our brand's increasing at this rate, but all of our brands are kind of like this, right? Or maybe increasing at this rate. And so at what point would those lines really where the new brand surpasses the sum of the old brand? So how I think about it as a SaaS company is it's very important. I think doing brand right is what helps you do search right. And search is a very important thing for any SaaS company. You want to be findable. And if you're not doing marketing right in other places, you won't be findable. So those are kind of my two insights, but I'm not a brand expert.
I love that thinking. So don't rebrand. And if you do rebrand, make sure people can still find you. The key is they just need to find you, which is an interesting way to think about marketing. It's sort of like, can people find you and do they want to find you? And those are the two things you need to achieve as a marketer.
I mean, that's kind of like at essence, kind of the marketing funnel, right? Of course, there are some people who will be so familiar with your brand that when they need what you offer, you will be one of the first few companies that they think of. And that's the most powerful thing a brand can have. That's what creates market leaders. But there will be infinitely more people that you'll try to sell, especially as an emerging brand and a growing company that don't think of you in the first few brands when they realize they need a solution. So the questions you have to answer and push how you push them through the marketing funnel is, why should they care about this? And are you actually like the best solution, right? So like they have to go from like, they have to become aware of the pain, then aware of the solutions. And then why should I care about you specifically? And are you really the best for me? And like, that's kind of the journey I think a lot of buyers take, at least in like the B2B space.
And if we go all the way back to the beginning, you started your career at Lumerit, a company I was also at the time, as I believe a video and web intern.
That's
What
correct,
led
yeah.
you from that role to go down the marketing pathway versus the video pathway or even coding pathway that I think you were dabbling in?
Yeah, and I still like dabbling in coding. I think there are days where the marketing is stressful and I'm like, I wish someone just like told me to make something, right? Because it's fun and I enjoy it. But I love marketing and that's really where my interest is. So my degree is in marketing, which apparently is unusual these days. I swear I work with more and more people who like don't have degrees in marketing. My degree was in marketing and I chose that degree because it felt to me like the right balance of like business and psychology, which were my two primary interests at the time. Like I wanted to understand people and like, kind of how that works, how we as humans work, and also like big interest in business.
So then you were an intern at Lumerit. You're doing video, you're doing coding, and you're doing marketing. What would you say you still use today from that first internship?
Deep question. I haven't thought of that, Nate. I mean, I learned so much about how business works. Like before I started as an intern in that, I was a marketing and project intern, basically. So like part of my internship was projects and then it moved on to marketing halfway through. And one of the like epiphanies I had, which I think kind of makes me the like intrinsically motivated self-starter I am today was I had just transitioned to the marketing part of the internship. So like so many weeks as product and then so many weeks as marketing. And I was like a week in and I was like, man, this is like not going smoothly. Everything went really smoothly when I was a project intern. And like, I was like keeping people coordinated and connecting stuff, but I wasn't like doing the work. Right. And I asked my boss at the time, Andrew, Andrew, Nate. And I was like, Andrew, what am I supposed to do with my time? Like, what do you want me to do? Am I just supposed to like figure out what I think is best and like do that? And Andrew's like, pretty much. And it was such a simple like thing to occur, but it was like, like in marketing, I don't like the work doesn't have to be super prescriptive, right? Like I get to explore new ideas and try new things. And so that was like, I think a small, but like really interesting moment from that time in my career. I learned a lot from my boss on the project side as well. How to work with developers, how to like be detailed, how to task management, like all of that. And he and I are still in touch today, all these years later. But I will keep thinking about that, Nate, because that's a good question. I would say everyone should be thinking, how did your first few experiences shape who you are today? Because sometimes we just don't have the discipline to stop, take a deep breath, and reflect.
Very true. Very true. And you didn't spend a lot of time reflecting. 4 years later, you were the director of marketing for Lumerit. What was that journey like for you?
Was it only 4 years? I thought it was like 5. What was that journey like for me? So I went from intern and I was working really hard trying to get a full-time position because I wanted to keep doing marketing. So then I got a job as a marketing specialist, which I did for a while. During that time, like the specialist part of me, I was running systems and ads and A/B tests and all of that. And I look back now and I'm like, man, I was just going so fast. And we were a small team. There were like 4 of us and it was really fun. So I look back at that like very fondly, like, man, it's just fun to have a group of 4 people sitting like in a corner of an office and like they're collaborating constantly and like doing cool work. And so I really, that's when I got good at like paid media and understanding budgets and like tracking performance and like, is this driving results? Because I'm like a very like, my motivation, like when I see results come in is like so high. It's like, yes, like let's latch on to that and like take that energy with us to the next, that next failure, because there's a lot of failures when you're doing a lot of testing. Then I became a manager of demand gen, basically, which was, really not a huge step up from what I was doing, just like the role changed because I was like, because of that, like, hey, yeah, whatever you think, Brian, is like the best use of your time, right? Like Andrew wasn't letting me like roam around freely, but he did like, provide guidance and we talked about what I was doing and why I was doing it a lot. So I was always pushing to like do the next thing, get more responsibility, like, spend more money, that sort of thing. So I was the manager of demand gen for a while and then, became a director of demand gen and started having direct reports and managing more complex processes, marketing operation, like pretty much running like the campaigns of the company. So it was kind of like demand gen plus digital as a whole.
How did you find, as you stepped into this director role, what would you say were your first learnings in engaging more with the leadership of the company, like the CEO, the CFO, et cetera?
Yeah, it was intimidating at first. I didn't necessarily view myself as like a bad communicator, but I've never been like never been like the most exciting person, right? Or maybe excitable. I'm like, professionally, I kind of try to sit back, observe, look at things, make changes. Maybe that makes me a good marketer, but it certainly poses some challenges when it comes to leading up and like getting change to occur. So had some struggles there that was like, I think when you're at that point, you have to like take some self-ownership of it and be like, how do I adapt to help, communicate better and whatnot. And there's like, if you've read The Speed of Trust, right, there's 2 types of trust. There's credibility and then there's character, right? Like we were always good on character. I don't think anyone was questioning each other's character, but I was a, brand new director, had only been doing marketing for apparently 4 years. I think it's 5 years, Nate. But it's fair that I didn't have like full credibility levels of trust, right? And so when you don't have that, what are the things you need to do to like continue building that. And people aren't going to like just take what you say at face value. They want some proof. They want some evidence. And that's always going to be the case, even as your credibility increases over time. And as you become a director or a manager and you start managing people who haven't, done things before, you need to say, like, what is the level of credibility they have in doing this? Because you don't want to give people too long of a leash, but you don't want to like micromanage them either, because then you're not making yourself like effective. Like the thing that excites me about being a marketing manager, like with a team, is the ability to like get more done and do cooler, bigger projects, because it's not just me doing all the work. If you've ever seen me design something, you know that it would not be as cool if I was doing all of the work.
So actually taking one step back from that, it's easier to learn something from someone who didn't get it right the first time than someone who's just like, oh, I don't know, it's easy to communicate with leadership. It came naturally. So I'm excited by that because there's more opportunity to learn from like what you did differently. How did you build that credibility with them?
Being a lot of repetition definitely helps build credibility. I also had the good fortune of having some really strong leaders in other areas who like could be like mentors to me and give me good advice on how to handle like specific relationships and like how certain people handle conflict and how I kind of handle conflict. And so like that was really key. So if you have that available to you, like lean into it. It could be a scary proposition because you have to kind of trust someone else and be like, hey, I need help in this area. But I like that's part of being human and part of growing, and like be upfront when it's not working. I think that was something that has really helped me is, if you're stuck in a rut in like a bad communication pattern with a person, like don't just try to stay there and keep trying the same thing. Like, hey, this isn't working. This is what's happening. Like, how do we fix it? Which is tough. And it's hard enough to identify like when you're in that rut. And it's even harder to like, at least for someone like me who doesn't love confrontation, like to get up the courage to say, hey, this isn't working. This is what I see and why it's like not working. Like, how can we not why it's not working, but the ramifications of it not working, right? Because this isn't working, we're not doing these things or making these decisions or, talking about having the right conversations, right? So like in marketing, you're trying to grow a business. If you don't think your boss is allowing the right conversations to occur to grow a business, you don't want to sit there idly by, but you have to, in a respectful way, figure out how to like have those conversations, right? And hopefully you have like a one-on-one where you've got a good like opportunity to do this naturally. In some cases, maybe you have a skip level with your boss's boss and you need to kind of, talk about it. But again, you got to be very careful how you approach those.
Speaking of things you need to be careful about how you approach, your second company was originally Scaleworks, rebranded to Element. What was your experience leading that rebrand? And I believe you rebuilt marketing operations essentially from scratch during that role.
Yeah, that rebrand actually was one of the I've been a part of like 5 rebrands at this point, one of which we didn't change names. We just changed colors. That's fine. Let me say that for the record. Like if you want to do that, that's fine. But if you're trying to change the identity of the company, that's harder. In the case of working at Scaleworks, the Scaleworks name still existed. We rebranded Scaleworks Venture Finance to Element SaaS Finance. So we were lending money under a different name. But the Scaleworks Venture Finance brand wasn't like a super well-known brand. So like that rebrand actually wasn't a big bump because we did the rebrand and we had raised a funding round at the time. We got some great like PR and we featured in TechCrunch a couple times. And actually that like was helpful. But I think that's what companies expect a rebrand to always be. And it's definitely not the case. Like if people are familiar with your product and your name and what you do, and you've got like some like equity in your brand there, and you just decide to become someone else, you risk losing your base, and losing your base is like the death of a company if you're not careful. So that would be my thoughts on the branding part, since you mentioned that specifically, Nate.
I love that. That's an interesting way to think about it. Sort of if you haven't achieved the traction yet you wanted on your first name, there might not be harm, and there could even be upside in rebranding. But if you're already getting the traction you want, don't risk suddenly changing your address when people are already looking for where you currently are.
Yeah.
What was it?
Exactly.
What was it like rebuilding the marketing operations side?
Again, wasn't a huge company. Like we did a small CRM migration, and then I think the main part of that was introducing marketing automation. So they had a CRM for managing deals, but they didn't have anything for like marketing automation, tracking funnel stages, email sending, anything like that. So that was basically all implemented from scratch as part of the migration. As far as what it was like, I find that very fun to do. So like to me, it was exhilarating. It was a fun challenge, but it was also an open book. So it wasn't intimidating. It was just exciting. I don't know if everyone would view it that way.
I have a feeling I might find that more intimidating, at least the first time. I've never rebuilt marketing operations from scratch. If someone
Well,
if
I
someone is
had done
listening to this, oh, sorry, go ahead.
a few marketing automation migrations at that point. So I was familiar with like moving like emails from Pardot to ActiveCampaign or, from Zoho to Pardot. And, I had done several of those at that point in my career. So it actually felt easier not having to like make sure everything was moved over perfectly versus just like, okay, what should this look like? Right. And so like taking the time to sit back and kind of map it out, whiteboard, post-it notes, do something tactile so you really feel like you understand like what's happening with the prospects you're putting into the marketing automation. But that part I found very freeing, that it was like net new. And I think there's probably a lot of companies out there that have like half a decade old marketing automation. Maybe they're using the right technology, maybe they're not, or maybe they're using the right tech, but like they just didn't implement it quite right. And it seems so painful to rip off the Band-Aid to do it differently. But you can rip off the Band-Aid. And a lot of times I think that is the right choice. Again, though, the better measurement you have, better you're going to understand if that like is necessary or not.
And marketing operations, and especially automation, has changed so much in the last even 3 years. If you were to have a company come up to you and say like, Brian, we don't have any automation and we want to build the right automation from scratch, what would you set them up with today?
Well, like what tools would I set them up with?
Yeah, tools, processes, the whole thing.
Man, that's such a big question, Nate. I mean, the tool that you should use, like depends on so many different factors, how you want to accept leads, how you want to work leads, how you want to nurture prospects. If there are other integrations you need to work like flawlessly or not, right? I think HubSpot, super popular for like startups, it's kind of like one ecosystem, right? And that can be implemented very well. My personal favorite, like marketing automation tool, I think is ActiveCampaign. I found that to be very flexible, but of course with like flexibility, that's not always the best thing, right? Overall, I'd recommend you hire like a very experienced marketing operations person, because if that's a role where if you try to like cheap out on it and try to like get the budget person with less experience who like you're going to just end up with an inferior product, and that's going to affect the efficiency of your marketing team, therefore the efficiency of your pipeline, the efficiency of sales, like all of that stuff. I've had people delete fields and CRMs before on accident. Like that to me is like one of the biggest sins you can make in like marketing operations is like, you just deleted a field that all of the salespeople rely on. And now we have to figure out a way to like back this up and like restore it. And you've ruined like 12 people's day, right? So there's that aspect of it. So hire the right person, but definitely take the time to find the right tools. So if you're really like, are you ABM first or are you leads first? Or are you some like hybrid of the two, right? There's a lot, like everyone nowadays is talking about all the data systems. Like Clay is a really like hot topic, but they're really just pulling data from other providers. So like, do you want to just start with another provider? If you have a large list of accounts, you can pull data from one provider, decide, this isn't like perfect, and then stop it. And you still have all the data that you pulled for that list of accounts while you then try another provider. Now you're layering data on top of each other and you can create more accurate information. But that's kind of a disparate thought, but I think it's timely because of the topics that people are discussing with like AI enrichment and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting. I'm curious on that team building portion. So don't hire a person with less experience to run your CRM. What other roles would you fill? Let's say you have a 5-person team for a small SaaS company. What would be the first roles you would fill?
5-person team for all of marketing?
We're starting small.
Okay. Yeah, all of marketing. Okay. So myself and I get 5 direct hires. Okay. Definitely marketing ops. You have to have that unless you have like a rev ops department and they have like the marketing ops person and it doesn't count to your head count. But let's say it counts to your marketing head count in this instance. That's for sure. Then I think you need to make the decision, are you going to hire specialists who are really strong at one thing? Like, do you want a performance marketing person who knows paid search like the back of their hand? My recommendation would actually be to hire more of a campaign manager, and then you rely on like the specialist information by channel from your like agency support. So find the agencies that are working, you know, 13 different accounts like yours in Google so that you can get all the learnings that they have. Because if you manage that in-house, you're actually not getting those learnings. But you still want that in-house person to manage that relationship with the agencies and push campaigns forward and whatnot. So you might need 1 or 2 campaign managers, depending on like how you're dividing your market. If you just have like one ICP and it's straightforward, you can probably get away with 1. A lot of companies, like you really have to think, this industry is different than that industry, or this size of deal is bigger than that size of deal. And like it's fundamentally different. So you might want to split it up 2 ways there. You need someone in content, and you can outsource a lot of that. You can use AI to do a lot of that, but you need someone who's like a good editor and writer. Nowadays, you can use really cool SEO tools for AI. So a content person can become like an SEO, not like a full expert, but like at least SEO competent, right? So if you're small, like that's really important. SEO is another area though, where I'd say rely on the agency, right? And then have the content person like supplemental and managing that relationship. Product marketing, I would probably put the last 2 roles in product marketing, just product and lifecycle marketing. You want to understand your customers, how they're growing, how you can support their growth, and your prospects. What do they need? How do they think about the product? What are their like aha, eureka moments that you just want to get in front of them? They can help you handle analyst relations if you're at that point. They can enable the sales team better, which is really important. You need like your audience experts.
You mentioned for 2 of those roles, focusing on an agency, having one of these people manage that agency relationship. I think one of the most relatable things for any marketer is the pain of hiring the wrong agency, either because it is the wrong agency or because you just don't know how to manage them effectively. How would you do those 2 parts? Like, let's start with the first one. How would you hire the right agency that actually can do the job well?
So a lot of people like the phrase is it hire fast, fire fast, right?
Yeah.
That's not the right approach with an agency, because these are like contractually binding agreements. Most agencies aren't going to let you like, like run a free trial with them, for lack of a better word, right? So you want to get it right the first time. You want references. If you don't have references for an agency, like look at who their testimonials are on their website and reach out to those people. I've done that a few times. Like, hey, you wrote this testimonial for this agency, so I know you've worked with them. What are your thoughts? I've had a couple instances where the person that the exact person that they were quoting as like a testimonial responded to me like, yeah, I wouldn't hire them again. Here was the challenge, right? Or I would only hire them if. And so that's really great insight, right? Because they could be a great agency, but not great for you. So that's key. Make sure you know exactly who the agency you're going to work with. If you like, as soon as you reach out to an agency, the agency is going to give you their like A team, and then you're going to sign the contract. They're like, all right, here's the C team. And it's like, whoa, what happened to the A team, right? You want the A team. So just like say my expectation is that I will be speaking to the people who will work on the contract. Now, of course, someone at that company could move along. I've had that happen before where I really, really liked an agency, and then one person moved along, and it turned out I didn't like the agency. I just really liked the account manager at the agency. And as soon as that account manager left, the next 2 account managers that I went through like really quickly could not get it done with. So that's a few options. Don't go probably with like the big flashy agency that's making the huge splash, right? Like your agency should align, or agencies should align with your general marketing strategy, which should align with how you're going to grow the business. So if your company doesn't know how you're going to grow the business, then your marketing strategy doesn't know how you're going to grow the business. So your marketing budget isn't applied to how you want to grow the business, and you're not going to find the right agency for you, which is tough to tell a marketer because they don't control like a lot of that stuff. But that's where the leading up part comes in. And you can say, hey, I think our marketing strategy has a gap because I don't understand how the business is going to do these things. So I can't understand like what the marketing strategy should be in those categories. And that's something I think a lot of CEOs are receptive to. If you know your CEO and have a relationship with them, you could probably do a skip level even and talk about that.
That's a very good point. Understand your business well. So let's say you hire an agency. You've identified the agency, they're a great agency. What's the difference between managing an agency relationship well and managing a direct report well?
Well, I have pretty different expectations like with each of them. With an agency, like when I'm working with an agency, I want like them to be driving a lot of like, this is how we should be doing stuff. If I'm pushing back on them, be like, no, we should do it differently, I'm either stupid or I've hired the wrong agency, right? I shouldn't be pushing back at the right agency for doing their job because they're supposed to be the experts. So if I don't trust them to be the experts, then they don't have credibility in my mind. So why did I hire them as the agency, right? That said, of course, you have to push back and like, but this is like, with this information about our company, which I have and you do not have, would you do anything differently, right? And you have to give your agency the opportunity to succeed and fail, and you have to enable them to get smarter, right? So that's a big part of your job there. But they should really be driving whatever it is you've hired them to do. So whatever like meeting cadence you have, they should be like driving the meetings. This is what we've done. This is what's coming up. This is our recommendation. This is what we need from you, etc. Especially if you're working with like an SEO agency or an ad agency or a like CRO agency. That's a great agency to hire if you have extra money. Hire if you're a small company and you haven't quite figured out how to like get your product to market with the right messaging and stuff. Try a CRO agency and see like they'll have ideas for how to change your website to just make you appear different. But they should be driving that and telling you how they're doing. At the same time, you should let them grade their own homework. So if they are telling you everything's going great and you're looking at it, you're like, stuff's not quite going great. So like you're picking, like if the agency's picking the KPIs and they're like, yeah, our ads got clicked on 7 times more than they did the month prior. See, aren't you glad you hired us? And you're like, then why did my pipeline fall off a cliff the moment I hired you, right? Then like that's not the right balance. Conversely, when you are talking about managing a direct report, you have to understand like where they're trying to go within the org, their career, what motivates them. You have to have a deeper relationship there that's a bit less transactional. And not saying you can't have like good non-transactional relationships with agencies, but for the most part, like it's a business relationship, right? And your relationship is more one to many. In some cases, you'll have like one account manager and that's really who you'll be speaking with. But a lot of times you'll speak with a team of, call it 2 to 5 people, depending on the agency. With the direct report, you have to build a relationship with them outside of like just the day-to-day work. I think most trust is built when people get to know someone else as a human, as opposed to getting to know them professionally. That's not how everyone works. I work with a few people right now who like, they're like, I build trust like on the job during the hours, like in the trenches, right? And if that's you, then great. But when you're that type of person and you're managing someone who's not that type of person, you have to find those other opportunities to build trust. And then as far as like getting work done, you have to draw different lines of how you're going to enforce performance and expectations with the person. You have to consider reviews, give feedback frequent and often. The sooner you can give feedback, really, the better, right? Like, and explain why and try to understand how does this person view feedback, to how do I need to approach that? What does this person value in themselves? There's so many tools at this point, like disc profile, insights, strength finders, etc., that try to like dissect a person. And I think you could pick any one of them and you could get like 60% of the information you need, but you got to take it that last 40% yourself by actually building the relationship. And I think that is fundamentally different than when you're working with an agency.
It is. It almost sounds like a completely different thing. If you are an employee at a company and you want to build a better relationship with your CMO or your manager and impress them with the quality of the work you're doing, your dedication, what would you say are the 1 or 2 things an employee could do that would really impress you?
Well, you're a marketer, right? So market yourself. But like, if you can show me, hey, I did these things and like this was the hypothesis, this is the data behind it, then that's great. And some stuff isn't even like measurable in that way. Just like this is an initiative I started. If it's an initiative that the employees kicked off on their own, they're like, I want to do this thing for these reasons, and I agree to it. I really, really want them to follow up on it and like give me the conclusion, right? Not just like, oh yeah, we did that. And it was like, okay, did you learn anything? What occurred, right? You have to give me opportunities to see the results of your work and the quality of your work, and not just me, but give me opportunities. If I'm trying to get you a promotion, for example, I need opportunities to show like the managers I work with and the people above me, yeah, this is like, see this great work. That's why we need to retain this person and give them a promotion. But you have to enable that a lot. But you have to put in the work. It doesn't have to be a crazy amount of work. But if you're like running projects and you're running around, that's all you're doing, and you're not like summarizing and putting three slides together for the big initiative you did and just, sending that up, you're missing the opportunities to communicate with leadership about why you're valuable. Just don't do it in like an arrogant way, because that never comes off well.
Yeah, sometimes taking it that final 3% really makes all the difference. What have been your best agency interaction?
I have a agency I'm working with right now that's probably the best agency I've ever worked with. It's just so smooth to work with them. I won't say their name, not that I don't want to like give them credit, but if anyone wants to know the agency's name, I'll let them know. You can DM me. They're one of the agencies where they do what they say, and like you can just always count on that. And if I push back on anything, I don't feel like they're just accepting it because I'm the client, because you don't want that. But I also don't feel like they're pushing back against me excessively, right? It feels like there's constructive tension whenever we're talking about how we should approach a problem. And that's great. So that's like probably been my best agency experience. Doesn't hurt that we've like driven some of the best results, because like we're moving quickly on really, really impactful things. And so I can't say that hurts, but like we aren't necessarily the group of people you'd expect to like become a friend group per se, but like we are a very powerful marketing force, which I love.
It's amazing. Let's say, keeping in mind the way different channels are developing right now, what are the new and interesting channels, how the business is changing. Let's say you had $5 million given to you today to spend on marketing for a SaaS company, B2B SaaS company. Where would you start allocating those funds?
So if I had $5 million to allocate to a SaaS company, B2B SaaS company, that wasn't spending money today in marketing, is that the question?
Yeah.
If I had $5 million, I would figure out what period of time I need to spread the money out over, right? Call it a runway, if you will. SaaS companies think about their growth in runways a lot. Like, I raised money, I have this much runway. I borrowed money, I have this much runway. When do I need to like get funding again? Or is my runway long enough to break even, right? So figure out your runway, work with your CFO or whoever's your most senior finance person for that. And then you want to spend a decent amount of it quickly, because spending money sooner is almost always better than spending money later, with all other things equal, right? Because if you spend money sooner, you're going to get results sooner. And if you get results sooner, even if you get failures, you're getting feedback sooner. And then that feedback becomes knowledge, and knowledge becomes power. So you want to balance spending money quickly with not spending too much if you've not learning the right things, right? So you don't want to be like, oh, I need to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, because I want to throw the spaghetti at the wall as fast as possible, right? You're more like, I'm going to throw a noodle at every wall and see which wall has a noodle on it at the end of the day. So don't throw 30 noodles at one wall, maybe throw 5 noodles at a wall. And then be like, oh, okay, these noodles stuck. So then you apply more money there. So like, if I was thinking about that in terms of channels, I would say you have to go to at least one industry event so you can meet some people and have some face-to-face time. Try to get your marketers to that event as well. It's a great time to ask the people at that event what competitors they're aware of, if they've heard of you, and really learn some information there. You're going to want to explore, what does it look like competitively on Google and on LinkedIn, and how does my audience react? Try to figure out what types of content they're interested in. You can do that like educated guess just by examining like other people in the space, what's getting engaged with. So that is kind of how I'd approach it generally, right? Like you want to divide and try a bunch of different things, but you don't want to spread yourself too thin where you're like, I'm right-handed, right? I want to do as much as I can with my right hand and spend as much money as possible without, throwing too many noodles at one wall, to keep that analogy going. If I start having to use my left hand to do stuff because I've taken on too much work, then I'm doing some things poorly and I'm not doing it in a disciplined enough way that the failure is going to be the right amount of feedback.
That's a great analogy. When you're considering the second stage of growth, you're past the first stage, you have product market fit, you're now starting to scale. What do you think are the most common mistakes that you've seen at companies, either that you've been at or that you've observed, when it comes from growing from, let's say, $100 million in annual recurring revenue to 300, 400, 500 million?
I think the most common mistake by far is that what worked in the past will keep working. I've seen that like everywhere I've worked. And then eventually it doesn't work and people are like, stop working. What do we do, right? And this is why you want to hire marketers with experience, because marketers with experience have a lot of playbooks. And so what happens if you have a marketer without a lot of experience? They run their playbook, the playbook stops working, and they're like, what do I do now? And then they try to create a new playbook, right? And who do you want? Do you want a person who's creating a new playbook, or the person with 12 playbooks being like, okay, that one didn't work. Let's try it, like next playbook up, right? And so you're just starting so much further ahead than if you've got someone who's, trying to reinvent the wheel essentially, right? So that's the most common mistake I see by far is it worked previously. Why won't it work now? The second mistake I'd say is like, what is this market that you're tapping into to grow to that next stage? I think it's tied a bit to the first one because sometimes who you sell to and who you close well as a SaaS company might not be the same type of, might not be the same persona, might not be the same type of account as you would like when you were in that like $10 to $50 million range, right? And so you have to actually address like what is the total addressable market for what I'm trying to do, and then what's really the sales addressable market, and am I doing the right tactics to get in front of those accounts? So we have a great COO at Maxio who I think really has a handle on that. So I'm very grateful for that fact, because if we didn't, then I think we would be more blind as far as who we're trying to go after and how we're going to get growth. Because ultimately, prospects have to exist somewhere for you to get customers. You can't like go fishing in a pool with no fish and expect to, land customers. And I think that's really important. And as you grow, like where you're fishing, how you're fishing to keep that analogy going is not the same.
That's fair. You mentioned the sales side of that as well. And that's an area I'm curious to understand some of your thoughts on. If you could change one thing about the sales teams that you've worked with in the past, what would be the most common thing that you would like to see sales teams do differently?
Oh, man, there's always tension, right, between marketing and sales. And the tension is basically proportionate to, I guess, like inversely proportionate maybe to how much you're exceeding your pipeline goals. So if your pipeline goals are being exceeded a lot, then revenue solves all pain and people are happy, right? There's like a painkiller effect, right? And then if salespeople start missing their quotas and they're not getting as much pipeline as they want, right? Then all of a sudden there's a lot more pain. And so the tension increases. By far, the thing that annoys me the most is I spend a ton of time and effort to generate leads, and then those leads aren't worked well. Whether it's they're not worked in the right amount of time, like, hey, this person requested a demo. Why is it 4 days later and you still haven't emailed them, right? Like, this person's so valuable. Do you realize how much it cost us to get this person in? Like every lead is precious. So that's the number one thing that annoys me. Follow up on leads quickly and, write outreach, personalize it, like understand who you're talking to. That's the priority. And then the second thing that annoys me, I think, is I have to think about how to phrase this. When a sales team thinks they really understand marketing, that is also quite frustrating. Specifically when they're like, well, like, why don't you get more leads? Like almost as if spending money in marketing is like a gumball machine. I put in this many quarters. Why don't I have that many gumballs, right? And it's like, that's not how this works, right? Like that's why you need to treat every lead well. And that ends up manifesting in a few different ways. A common way I think a lot of people, like everyone in my network I've talked to who's been struggling with lately, is like this conversation between like who gets credit. And it's like, that's such an unproductive conversation. You want your marketing team focused on anything that they can do to drive as much pipeline and business as possible. Your marketing team should not care necessarily who gets credit. That is a sales thing because salespeople get compensated a lot based on that credit. If you're compensating your marketing team on how marketing gets credit, now you've created a perverse incentive and you shouldn't. So full stop, don't do that. When a sales team thinks they understand marketing, which is what's driving me crazy, that conversation becomes really tough to overcome. Where it's like, no. Like, I know you called that person and they picked up the phone. And so that's how like you created the opportunity and all this stuff. But you were working off of intent data that marketing generated and paid for, right? So it's like, if they hadn't heard of the company, they might have been more annoyed when they got a cold call from you and they're like, who are you? Right. And so like, that's valuable. So like the ways you measure that are just different. So that's where there will be a lot of unproductive tension and not constructive tension if the sales team thinks they do marketing. But I think in general, everyone thinks they do marketing.
I love what you were saying there about not giving a direct incentive to the marketing team. I feel like incentive design shows up in all of life and is so important to the way that humans behave. If we change the incentives, we often change a lot of the behaviors that we might find very hard to change otherwise. I want to go into the area of B2B versus B2C. You've been at companies like Lumerit, they're direct to consumer. You've been at companies like Maxio, they're direct to business. What do you see as the biggest differences that you've observed between what works for B2C and what works for B2B?
When you're selling to a consumer, it's really obvious how emotionally driven the decision is based on like how expensive your product is and like the ramifications. So when I was in B2C, I spent most of my time in higher education, which is a very emotional decision about, I gotta like figure out college in my life and like, what am I going to do with it? And I don't want to make the wrong choice. There's all this stuff at stake for the buyer. When I moved to B2B, my first inkling was like, this is less emotional. Everyone's looking at numbers. I'm selling to CFOs and founders and trying to get them to like borrow money, right? So like, this isn't emotional. And the reality is pretty much nothing is more emotional than like having your job and livelihood at stake while you're making this decision. So in that way, I'd say it's actually really similar, and more B2B buyers want to act like B2C buyers. That's why we see PLG doing really well for so many of these companies. Like when I look at the marketing tools that people are using in 2025 that they weren't using in like 2021, like everyone now is using ChatGPT. A lot of people are using Clay. Both of those have PLG things you can get in and try and experience. That's a very B2C thing. That starts the conversation. And a lot of times you'll have to talk to a sales team to figure out like the details of how you're going to, license their software and create users and how much usage you need to pay for and all of that. But they're apt more like B2C buyers because they want to do that exploration on them, like themselves. And I'm biased because that's how I like to buy. Like, I don't want, if I go to your website and I can learn very little about your product on your website, and I basically have to talk to sales to learn much about your product, then I'm almost certainly not going to buy your product because I'm going to go to a competitor that is giving me that information. I'm going to learn more about them. I'm going to become more excited about how they talk about things. Every company has like a perspective of how things should be done for whatever problem they solve. If we go back to marketing automation, like HubSpot thinks things should be done a very specific way. And that's different than how Salesforce thinks it should be done. As a marketer, I try to sell to people and convince people that the way we think stuff should be done is the way that stuff should be done. But some people are going to have a natural bias towards that anyway. And if you're not talking about your product and they can't see the product, you're missing out on all that opportunity to get like free natural biases towards your solution. So I'm going to go to a competitor, and then that's going to be my first impression. I'm like, oh, that's how it should be done. And now you're on the back foot, even if I do take the sales call with you. So those are the two ways that I would say B2B and B2C are a bit different. Although I guess I kind of mostly talked about how B2B.
I love that though. And I love how at the end of the day, it's still a human buying in either situation. So that like the emotions of a human are crucial. You cannot escape from that. PLG. This is a term that some people listening might not be familiar with, and it's a fascinating area. Can you take us deeper into what is PLG?
Yeah, PLG stands for product-led growth. So to me, it's like one of the more exciting ways to do marketing these days, especially in B2B, because it enables like direct response marketing, and that really enables your performance marketing. So if you're trying to get people to take a sales call, your conversion rates are going to be lower, right? If you're trying to get people to sign up for a free trial where they just like put in their email and now they're like using your application, you're going to have a lot more conversions. And so you're going to get more intent data. You're going to get better brand experiences with more people at a lower price. And there's a bunch of arguments for why you could be doing PLG, but it is a fundamentally different growth strategy. The company has to bill it differently. If you want to like allow people to sign up automatically, you have to manage trials and provisioning. All of that can be done with Maxio. So I'll throw in the little plug there because that's what we do. But that's different than getting someone to talk to your sales team. So you're going to have to create new metrics and basically a new go-to-market like motion for how you're measuring. We're trying to get people into the product and then sell them because that gives you alternate ways to communicate with your prospects as well. Now you have users, and marketing to users is different than marketing to just prospects. Like, what are you going to put in the application? How are you going to get them in the first 2 minutes of signing up for free trial to be like, I like things this way. And then like once you hit that, then that's really when the flywheel starts. And it's way easier to throw what I would say like program dollars, like marketing program dollars, not headcount, not T&E, program dollars. It's easy to throw money at program dollars to drive PLG once you've gotten that flywheel started.
And you mentioned those first 2 minutes. A theme I'm noticing across a lot of the marketing I'm exposed to is short attention spans. People don't have a lot of time for anything, whether it's like thought leadership posts you mentioned earlier on LinkedIn or even getting into a product. How do you see short attention spans showing up in the work you're doing?
I mean, we're doing a lot more like vertical videos these days. Nate, last time you and I spoke, you mentioned how you were testing like the formula of a video, I believe, and like maybe the blueprint, how like if the attention span's the most important part, right? It's that first 2 seconds of the video. Like, what are the commonalities you can get in the first 2 seconds of the video to encourage someone to like engage with it and to decide they're going to watch the whole thing and not swipe it away? Another way we're doing that is we do a lot more color testing of our like digital ads. So like, it's like we just need to break through the noise and get them to see us, right? And so you can have the exact same ad with the exact same message, pretty much the exact same creative, but have the creative be a different color, like a primary color of orange versus blue, et cetera, right? Do you want the ad to contrast with the surrounding platform it's on? Sometimes you know what that's going to be. And if you're doing programmatic, then you might not know, right? So you try different things. But like that alone, I think really has, like, to me, it was shocking how important just the color was. Like, when I think about testing stuff and finding improvements in efficiency, you want to test the biggest stuff first. So color apparently is one of the bigger things.
That's incredible. I love that. I remember, seeing studies years and years ago of how color testing on, I think it's Google search homepage was something Google was doing probably a lot later stage, not likely one of the first things.
Probably not.
I want to hear your thoughts on AI. How are you seeing AI applied to your work productively? And where are the places where you're seeing AI not really adding value and just being a buzzword?
Man, our creative director is a wizard with AI. It's like, it's almost like you gave him his own like photography team he could send anywhere in the world to get a photo of anything, right? Like Maxio has a theme. We have a space theme for a lot of stuff. And so it's like, if you see anything that looks like a real astronaut in outer space, like that's AI. And we would not have been able to get that photo really, right, without like, it being a stock photo or something we paid for. So like, that's real. The creative world, AI is doing crazy stuff. It makes editing voiceovers simpler. When I got started in my career, obviously I did a lot of video editing in my first internship, and people are not as concise as they think they are. We did some like testimonial videos, and somebody was like, man, I don't remember being so like smooth and well worded. And I was like, you were not. We cut a lot, like B-roll hit a lot of sins. AI can smooth out a lot of that these days, so that helps. We're also using AI to like launch campaigns faster and be more agile. Just this week, we took a like big guide that our content team had produced, and we're like, how do we make the most of this big guide? And so we created a campaign messaging framework, who we're talking about, what the arguments are. We fed that into the AI, the large language model. We gave it the content piece. We gave it all the supporting content pieces and recent things we had done on similar topics. And we were like, hey, help us create a campaign plan with this. And it's very much like garbage in, garbage out, or gold in, gold out. And we were able to put together a full 3-week email cadence with social calendar. This is 3 people working on this, full 4 days. And that's really cool. And so that's one of the reasons why I say try to hire experienced people, because experienced people will be able to do a lot more with AI because they'll be able to put better stuff into it. And then also, this is key, when they get bad stuff out of it, they'll be like, this is bad. And they'll be able to make those connections and understand what the fundamentals of a campaign should be. So that's another way we're using AI. We're using it for video editing. Nate, we've talked about all these AI video tools that will just take a longer form piece of content and make it shorter. But again, it's about using everything we have as many times as we can, right? So that makes us more efficient as a team. We produce one longer form of content. We get the transcript, give that to AI. AI creates 3 blog posts about it. Each blog post, it creates an email for it, right? And it's like, oh, we just need to get the right person to have a really good webinar. And all of a sudden we've got, 13, 14, 15 other assets. So I think it really does change the way we do work in almost every way. I still haven't quite figured out how we can use AI to make our web development more efficient. Our developers use it to help with code and stuff like that. But we haven't quite gotten to the point where I can say, I want a landing page that looks kind of like this. And this is my platform. And this is like the whole website. Just give me the answer, right? It's not quite there yet. It's helpful, but it's not quite there yet. And I think we'll see it get there probably in 3 years or so.
Yeah, it is crazy how fast it's developing. I love that theme that you've brought up a few times of make the most of everything you have. Don't just do a webinar, but make the blog posts, make the social posts to go along with it. That brings us to our lightning round. And the lightning round, I'll throw out a few questions.
There's a lightning round?
There's a lightning round. I'll throw out a few questions. Feel free to answer more in depth or also just give a brief 1-word answer. First question is inbound or outbound?
Inbound.
Brand or direct response?
Brand.
Content quality or quantity?
Quality. AI will do the quantity.
Email or social?
Social. That's a tough one though. Man, you really got to do both. The answer to that's both, but if you have to pick one, I'd say social.
Execution or strategy?
Boy, this is a lightning round. I'm going to say strategy. I think you're better off with a good strategy with middling execution than you are with good execution to a middling strategy. So I'm going to say strategy.
First party data or third party intent data?
First party. 100% first party. Your marketing campaign strategy should be around driving first party data.
And this last one, I think I know the answer already. Self-serve tools or sales support?
You know the answer already. Self-serve for sure.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I'll roll out the red carpet for you here. Where can people go to hear more about Brian?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's about it. I don't do much else. But yeah, if you have anything you want to talk about, I'm happy to connect.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Nate.